The desert stretched endlessly beneath a sky bleached white by the Afghan sun, and somewhere in that vastness, a team of Navy SEALs had gone silent. Command had lost contact 47 minutes ago. The last transmission was garbled, punctuated by gunfire and shouting in Pashto. Satellite imagery showed nothing but dust and the geometric shadows of compound walls. No movement, no heat signatures that made sense. Just silence where there should have been chaos, and in the military, silence is never good. It means someone is hiding, someone is hunting, or someone is already dead. At Bagram Airfield, the Joint Operations Center buzzed with controlled urgency. Officers leaned over glowing screens, voices clipped and professional, but beneath that veneer was something rawer. These were their people out there. The quick reaction force was spinning up, but they were 20 minutes out, maybe more. Apache gunships were repositioning, but they needed coordinates, confirmation, something to shoot at. The fog of war had descended thick and suffocating. And in that fog, decisions had to be made with incomplete information and perfect consequences. Then someone did something unauthorized, something that would either save lives or end a career, maybe both. At the far end of the flight line, where the air shimmered with heat and jet fuel, an A-10 Thunderbolt II started its engines without clearance. The twin turbofans spooled up with a distinctive whine that made ground crews turn and stare. The Warthog, ugly and brutal and beloved, began to taxi without a flight plan, without authorization, without anything except the certainty that Americans were dying and someone had to do something. In the cockpit, Captain Rowan, Revenant Kess, checked her instruments with practiced efficiency. Her hands moved across switches and displays with the confidence of someone who had done this 1,000 times, but her jaw was set tight, her eyes hard. She knew what she was doing. She knew the cost. Court-martial, dishonorable discharge, the end of everything she had built. But she also knew something else, something that had been carved into her soul through years of combat. You don't leave people behind. Not ever. Not for bureaucracy, not for regulations, not for anything. The radio crackled. Hog 2-1, you are not cleared for takeoff. Return to hardstand immediately. Her call sign, her aircraft, her choice. Rowan didn't respond. She pushed the throttles forward and the A-10 began its takeoff roll, heavy with ordnance and defiance. Behind her, officers were shouting, making calls, starting processes that would destroy her. Ahead of her, somewhere in the mountains, men were fighting for their lives. The choice had never really been a choice at all. The Warthog lifted off, climbing into that pitiless sky, and with it went the last remnants of Captain Rowan Kess's military career as she knew it. What she didn't know yet was that she was flying toward something bigger than herself, bigger than rules, bigger than the career she was about to sacrifice. She was flying toward legend. The flight to the target area took 18 minutes, and every second of it was heavy with consequence. Rowan flew low, hugging the terrain, using valleys and ridgelines to mask her approach. The A-10 wasn't fast or graceful, but it was tough and it was deadly, and right now those were the only qualities that mattered. Her eyes scanned the horizon, watching for threats, for landmarks, for anything that would give her an advantage. The radio continued its angry chatter behind her, commands to return, warnings of consequences, legal threats wrapped in military jargon. She turned the volume down but didn't turn it off. She wanted them to know she could hear them. She just didn't care. The coordinates she had were from the last known position, but coordinates in mountainous terrain are approximations at best. She would have to find them visually, and in this landscape of browns and tans and shadows, that meant getting close, dangerously close. She armed her systems, felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle across her shoulders. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon, that 7-barrel monster that made the legendary, was ready. So were her Mavericks, her rockets, her entire deadly payload. But weapons without targets were just weight, and she needed to find her people first. Then she saw it. Smoke, thin and dark, rising from a compound nestled against a ridgeline. Not the black smoke of burning fuel or the white smoke of concealment, but the gray smoke of sustained fighting, of buildings taking fire, of a battle that hadn't ended. Her heart rate picked up, adrenaline sharpening everything into crystal clarity. She banked toward it, descending, pushing the limits of what the terrain allowed. And as she got closer, she started to see the picture clearly. The compound was larger than the initial reports suggested, a maze of walls and buildings that offered 100 firing positions and 1,000 places to hide. The SEALs were pinned down in the northern section. She could see the specific pattern of their defensive posture, the way they had created a perimeter that spoke of training and desperation in equal measure. But what made her breath catch was the number of enemy fighters surrounding them. Not a dozen, not even 2 dozen. The hillsides were crawling with insurgents, converging on that compound like a noose tightening. Her people were about to be overrun. Rowan keyed her radio, switching to the ground frequency. Any call sign, this is Hog 2-1, inbound your position, how copy, static. Then cutting through the interference and the chaos, a voice rough with dust and combat. Hog 2-1, Reaper 6. We are danger close, heavy contact all sides, ammunition critical. We need you now. No questions about authorization. No concerns about procedure. Just the desperate mathematics of survival. She recognized that voice. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Vance. A man she had flown support for twice before. A man who led from the front and never asked for anything he wouldn't do himself. Reaper 6, Revenant, I see you. Mark your position with smoke, red if you have it, and keep your heads down. This is going to be close. She heard something in his voice when he responded, something between relief and disbelief. Revenant, they let you fly again, she smiled, though there was no humor in it. They didn't exactly let me, Reaper. Smoke out. Seconds later, red smoke billowed from the northern section of the compound, vivid against the dust and death. She locked it into her mind, built a 3-dimensional map of the battlefield, calculated angles and distances and acceptable risks. Then she rolled in. The first pass was reconnaissance and terror. She came in low and fast, the warthog's distinctive silhouette screaming over the compound at 200 feet. Insurgents scattered, diving for cover, their concentration broken by the sudden appearance of American air power. She didn't fire, not yet. She needed them to show themselves, needed them to reveal their positions in their panic. And they did. Muzzle flashes sparkled from a dozen locations. Tracers reached up toward her like angry fireflies, and she cataloged every single one. Her finger rested on the trigger, patient and ready. The second pass was violence. She came around in a tight turn, lined up on the eastern ridge where the heaviest concentration of fire had come from, and pressed the trigger. The GAU-8 roared to life with a sound like the world tearing apart, a buzzsaw scream that could be heard for miles. 30-millimeter rounds, each the size of a beer bottle, poured down at 4,500 rounds per minute. The hillside erupted in dust and debris and bodies. Rocks shattered. Fighting positions disintegrated. Men who had been shooting at Americans 1 second simply ceased to exist the next. The warthog shuddered with the recoil. The cannon so powerful it could actually slow the aircraft in flight, but Rowan held it steady, walking her fire across the enemy line with surgical precision. Reaper 6, Revenant. Eastern ridge is suppressed. I've got more coming. She pulled up, gained altitude, and assessed. The insurgents were reacting now, some retreating, some trying to reposition, but most just trying to survive. The calculus of the battle had changed in seconds. What had been an overwhelming assault was now a desperate defense against an enemy that could strike from the sky with impunity. But she wasn't done. Not even close. The southern approach had another concentration of fighters, and they were still pressing the SEALs hard. She rolled in again. This time she used Mavericks, the AGM-65 air-to-ground missiles that could punch through concrete and turn vehicles into shrapnel. She locked onto a technical truck, one of those improvised fighting vehicles bristling with machine guns that insurgents loved and fired. The missile left the rail with a flash and a roar, tracking perfectly, and 2 seconds later the truck vanished in a fireball. The explosion was massive, secondary detonations suggesting ammunition or explosives in the bed. Pieces of the vehicle rained down across a 100-meter radius. She fired again, targeting a building that was pouring fire into the compound. The missile entered through the door and detonated inside. The structure collapsed inward, walls falling like broken promises. "Good hits, Revenant, keep it coming." Vance's voice was stronger now, energized by hope. She could hear his team rallying, returning fire with renewed intensity. The momentum was shifting, but Rowan knew the clock was working against her. Fuel was finite. Ammunition was finite. And every second she stayed on station was another second the Air Force had to scramble fighters to bring her back or shoot her down. She had to end this fast. She switched to rockets, the Hydra 70s loaded in her pods, and made 3 more passes in quick succession. Each pass brought fire and destruction. Each pass bought the SEALs precious seconds to regroup and consolidate. She worked methodically, professionally, destroying every threat she could identify. The compound's surroundings became a moonscape of craters and debris. Bodies lay scattered across the hillsides, testimony to what happens when close air support is delivered by someone who knows their craft and refuses to fail. The insurgent attack broke apart, fighters fleeing into the mountains, abandoning weapons and wounded in their haste to escape the angel of death circling above. Finally, after what felt like hours but was actually less than 7 minutes of sustained combat, Rowan pulled up and circled at altitude, searching for remaining threats. The battlefield had gone quiet except for the crackle of small fires and the distant echo of her engines. "Reaper 6, Revenant, I'm not seeing any more concentration. Status." There was a pause, and when Vance responded, his voice carried an emotion she couldn't quite name. "Revenant, we're secure. 3 wounded, none critical." "You just saved our lives, all of us. How the hell did you get here so fast?" She didn't answer directly. "QRF is inbound, 15 minutes out. You'll have proper support shortly. I need to RTB before they send someone to escort me back in handcuffs." Vance laughed, a short bark of sound that was part relief and part disbelief. "They're really going to court-martial you for this?" Rowan looked down at the compound, at the smoke and the red smoke grenade still burning, at the men moving around down there who would go home to their families because she had made a choice. "Probably," she said quietly. "Worth it." She turned the Warthog northeast, toward Bagram, toward consequences, toward whatever came next. Behind her, 12 Navy SEALs stood a little straighter, looked up at the sky a little longer, and committed a call sign to memory. Revenant, the one who came back from the dead to save others. The flight back was different. The radio had gone silent, no more commands or threats, just an ominous quiet that suggested people were making decisions above her pay grade. Rowan flew on autopilot, her hands light on the controls, her mind already preparing for what came next. She had been through enough military bureaucracy to know the process. There would be an investigation, depositions, reviews of regulations, and chain of command. Her actions would be dissected by people who had never heard bullets snap past their heads or felt the weight of knowing lives depended on split-second decisions. They would call it insubordination, unauthorized use of military assets, reckless endangerment. And technically, they would be right. She thought about her career, about the years she had spent earning respect in a community that didn't give it easily. The A-10 community was small, tight-knit, and she had fought for every inch of credibility. Female pilots were no longer a novelty, but they still had to prove themselves in ways their male counterparts didn't. She had done that. She had been the best, not the best female pilot, but the best pilot, period. Her gunnery scores were legendary. Her combat record was spotless. She had earned Revenant, not because of gender or politics, but because she brought people home. Twice she had flown missions that should have been suicide runs and walked away without a scratch. 3 times she had been the last aircraft on station, providing cover until she was flying on fumes, trusting her skill to get her home. And now she had thrown all of it away. Or had she? She tried to feel regret and couldn't quite manage it. Those men were alive. That was the only math that mattered in the end. Courts-martial could take her wings, could take her rank, could take everything except the knowledge that she had made the right choice. And maybe, she thought with bitter humor, they would be doing her a favor. She was tired. Tired of proving herself, tired of the politics, tired of the weight of expectations. Maybe civilian life wouldn't be so bad. She could fly bush planes in Alaska, or work as a contractor, or just walk away from aviation entirely. The thought felt hollow even as she considered it. Bagram Airfield appeared on the horizon, sprawling and dusty, home to thousands of military personnel and billions of dollars of equipment. She requested landing clearance, half expecting to be denied, but the tower responded professionally, giving her a vector and runway assignment as if this were any other day. She lined up, descended, and touched down smoothly. The A-10's wheels chirped on the concrete, and she taxied toward the hardstand, following the marshaller's signals. A crowd had gathered, she noticed. Ground crew, pilots, support personnel, all standing and watching. That wasn't normal. As she shut down the engines and went through her post-flight checks, she saw the security forces vehicle approaching. 2 Air Force Security Forces members, serious and armed, waiting at the bottom of the ladder. She took her time, securing the aircraft properly, documenting everything by the book. If they were going to hang her, she would give them no additional ammunition. Finally, she popped the canopy and climbed down, her flight suit dark with sweat, her body stiff from tension and adrenaline come down. The security forces sergeant stepped forward. "Captain Kess, you're to come with us, ma'am. The colonel wants to see you immediately." She nodded, unsurprised. "Lead the way." As they walked toward the waiting vehicle, she heard something unexpected. Applause, scattered at first, then building, spreading through the crowd of personnel who had stopped their work to watch. Ground crew clapping, pilots nodding in respect, even some officers who should have known better. She didn't acknowledge it, kept her eyes forward, but something tight in her chest loosened slightly. They understood, even if command wouldn't. The security forces sergeant glanced at her sideways. "Hell of a thing you did, ma'am," he said quietly. "My cousin's on that SEAL team, so, thank you." She swallowed hard, nodded once, and said nothing. What was there to say? Colonel Andrew Merrick was waiting in his office, a career officer with graying hair and a face that had seen too many wars. He dismissed the security forces with a wave, gestured for Rowan to sit, and just looked at her for a long moment. She met his gaze steadily, refusing to flinch or look away. Finally, he sighed, a sound like air leaving a tire, and shook his head. "Captain Kess, what the hell were you thinking?" It wasn't really a question, but she answered anyway. "I was thinking that our people were dying, sir, and someone needed to help them." Merrick's jaw tightened. "That's not your call to make. We have procedures, protocols, chain of command. You don't get to decide when those apply." "Respect, sir, those procedures would have gotten 12 men killed." Her voice was calm, factual, devoid of defiance or apology. "I had the capability, the position, and the time. They didn't." Merrick stood, walked to the window, stared out at the flight line. "You took off without clearance, without a flight plan, without authorization. You ignored direct orders to return. You engaged the enemy without proper coordination with ground forces. Do you have any idea how many regulations you violated?" She did. She had counted them during the flight back. 27 by her estimation, maybe more depending on how creative the lawyers got. "Yes, sir." "And you did it anyway?" It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir." Merrick turned back to her, and she saw something unexpected in his eyes. Not anger, but something more complicated. Respect, maybe, mixed with frustration and the weight of impossible choices. "The SEALs are calling you a hero. Vance personally called the theater commander to say you saved his entire team. The video from your gun camera is already spreading through the intelligence community. They're saying it's the most effective close air support mission flown this year, maybe longer." He paused, letting that sink in. "And I still have to end your career over it." Rowan had expected this, but hearing it spoken aloud still hurt. She kept her face neutral, military bearing holding her together when everything inside wanted to collapse. "I understand, sir." Merrick returned to his desk, pulled out a folder, opened it. Inside were forms, documents, the machinery of military justice preparing to grind her into nothing. "You'll be grounded pending investigation. Your wings are suspended effective immediately. There will be a formal inquiry, possibly a court-martial depending on what the lawyers decide. Your service record will note the unauthorized mission and the violations therein." Each sentence was a hammer blow, methodical and final. However, Merrick continued, and that single word made her look up sharply, there are some complications. He pulled out another set of papers. In the last 2 hours, I've received calls from a senator, 2 congressmen, and a major general at CENTCOM. The SEALs have submitted formal commendations for you. The Afghan provincial government wants to give you a medal. CNN has somehow gotten wind of the story and is calling it the unauthorized rescue. You've become, in the space of an afternoon, a significant political problem. He smiled, and there was no humor in it. Congratulations, Captain, you're famous. Rowan felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. Famous was the last thing she wanted. Famous meant scrutiny, meant debates on cable news, meant becoming a symbol rather than a person. Famous meant she could never just be a pilot again, never just do the job without carrying the weight of expectation and narrative. Sir, I just did what needed to be done. I don't want attention. Merrick nodded, as if he had expected that response. What you want stopped mattering the moment you took off without clearance. Now you're a story, and stories have their own momentum. He closed the folder, leaned back in his chair. Here's what's going to happen. You'll be grounded during the investigation, that's unavoidable. But I'm going to slow-walk the process. Let the political situation develop before we make any final decisions. If public opinion breaks your way, if the commendations carry enough weight, we might be able to resolve this with something less than a court-martial. A reprimand, maybe, or forced retirement with honors. You'll never fly for the Air Force again, that's certain, but we might be able to preserve your reputation. He looked at her directly. Is that acceptable, Captain? Rowan considered. Forced retirement was better than dishonorable discharge, better than prison time, which was theoretically possible for some of the violations. She would lose the thing she loved most, lose the mission and the community and the identity she had built, but she would walk away with her honor mostly intact. It was more than she had expected. Yes, sir, that's acceptable. Merrick nodded, stood, extended his hand. She shook it, his grip firm and surprisingly warm. Off the record, Captain. What you did today was extraordinary. Stupid, reckless, and contrary to everything we teach, but extraordinary. Those men are alive because of you. Their families will have them home because of you. That counts for something. She felt her throat tighten, emotion threatening to break through the professional facade she had maintained. Thank you, sir. He released her hand, stepped back into the formality of rank and regulation. You're dismissed, Captain. Report to your quarters and await further instructions. Do not speak to the press. Do not discuss the mission with anyone outside official channels. And for God's sake, don't do anything else that makes my life difficult. She saluted, he returned it, and she walked out of his office into an uncertain future. Behind her, Colonel Merrick sat back down and wondered how he was going to explain all this to his superiors. The next 72 hours were surreal. Rowan remained in her quarters as instructed, but isolation proved impossible. Fellow pilots stopped by with beer and stories and quiet expressions of support. Ground crew sent a card signed by dozens of people, thanking her for bringing the fight to the enemy. Someone left a bottle of bourbon outside her door with a note that read simply, "Revenant." She didn't drink it, but she kept the note. And then there were the messages from home, from her parents, from old friends, from people she hadn't heard from in years, all saying the same thing in different words. They had seen the news, they were proud, they were worried. The news coverage was everything she had feared. CNN ran the story with dramatic music and graphics, calling it the Lone Warrior, and framing her as a maverick hero who broke the rules to save lives. Fox News countered with a piece questioning whether emotional decision-making had a place in modern warfare, suggesting her actions set a dangerous precedent. Military blogs and forums exploded with debate, veterans arguing both sides with the passion of people who understood the stakes. She was lauded and criticized, defended and condemned, all by people who hadn't been there, who hadn't heard Vance's voice on the radio, who hadn't seen 12 Americans about to die because the system was too slow. On the fourth day, something unexpected happened. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Vance showed up at Bagram. He had flown in specifically to see her, still dirty from the field, his face showing the wear of combat and the aftermath. The security forces let him through without question, and he found her in the temporary quarters they had assigned her, staring at a wall and trying not to think about the future. He knocked, she opened the door, and for a moment they just looked at each other, a pilot and a SEAL, two professionals who had shared a moment of absolute trust in the worst circumstances possible. "Captain Kess," Vance said, and his voice carried a formality that didn't match his appearance. "May I come in?" She stepped aside, and he entered the small room, suddenly feeling smaller with his presence. He was a big man, built like someone who lived in the gym and the field, but he moved with careful precision. "I wanted to thank you in person," he said quietly. "What you did, what you risked, my team would be dead without you, all of us. We know that." Rowan shook her head. "You don't need to thank me. I did my job." "You did more than your job. You sacrificed your career for us." He pulled something from his pocket, a small metallic object that glinted in the fluorescent light. "This is my trident, my SEAL pin. I've carried it through 4 deployments, 23 combat missions. I want you to have it." She stared at it, stunned. SEAL tridents were sacred, earned through the most brutal training the military offered, symbols of a brotherhood that didn't easily share its honors. "Commander, I can't. That's yours. You earned that." Vance took her hand, pressed the trident into her palm, closed her fingers around it. "You earned it too. Different path, same result. You're one of us now, whether you wear the pin or not." She felt tears threatening, the first crack in the armor she had maintained for days, and she blinked them back furiously. "Thank you," she managed, her voice rough. Vance nodded, stepped back. "The team wants you to know something. We've all submitted statements supporting you, testifying that your actions were necessary and proportionate. We've contacted our command, and they're putting pressure on the Air Force to go easy on you. It might not be enough, but we're not going to let them crucify you without a fight." He smiled, and there was something fierce in it. "You didn't leave us behind. We're not leaving you behind." After he left, Rowan sat on her bunk and looked at the trident, this small piece of metal that represented so much. She thought about community, about loyalty, about the strange brotherhood of combat that transcended branch and rank and circumstance. She had given up her career for 12 men she barely knew, and they were fighting for her with everything they had. There was something pure in that exchange, something that made all the regulations and procedures and political calculations seem small and petty by comparison. She pinned the trident to her uniform jacket, unofficial and probably against regulations, but she didn't care. Let them add it to the list of her violations. The investigation moved forward with bureaucratic slowness, interviews and depositions and reviews of everything she had ever done in uniform. They examined her training records, her psychological evaluations, her performance reports, looking for patterns or warning signs that might explain or condemn her actions. They found nothing. Every assessment showed the same thing: exceptional pilot, strong tactical judgment, calm under pressure, exactly the kind of officer the Air Force wanted. Until she wasn't. The contradiction seemed to frustrate the investigators, as if they wanted her to be a problem child, a troublemaker with a history of issues. But she wasn't. She was just someone who had made an impossible choice. 3 weeks into the investigation, the political situation shifted dramatically. A major news network obtained footage from her gun camera, despite it being classified, and aired it during prime time. America watched as Captain Rowan Kess destroyed enemy positions with surgical precision, watched as she made pass after pass to protect the SEALs below, watched as she turned certain death into survival through skill and courage, and that massive cannon. The footage was visceral, undeniable, and it changed the narrative completely. Suddenly, she wasn't a rogue pilot who had violated regulations. She was a warrior who had saved American lives, a hero in an era hungry for clear-cut victories and simple stories of good versus evil. The Pentagon's press office was overwhelmed. Requests for interviews, appearances, statements flooded in from every major media outlet and half the minor ones. Politicians who had initially condemned her actions suddenly wanted to present her with awards. Defense contractors saw her as a perfect spokeswoman for the A-10 program, which was perpetually under threat from budget cuts. The Air Force found itself in an impossible position: court-martial a pilot that America had fallen in love with, or excuse actions that undermined military discipline. They chose a third option, the political option, the one that made everyone uncomfortable but offended the fewest powerful people. 2 months after her unauthorized mission, Captain Rowan Kess was called to a formal hearing. Not a court-martial, but an administrative review, a bureaucratic compromise that would determine her future without the spectacle of a trial. She wore her dress uniform, the trident still pinned to her jacket despite 3 separate people telling her to remove it. She sat before a panel of senior officers and civilian administrators and answered their questions with the same calm professionalism she had shown in the cockpit. Yes, she understood she had violated regulations. Yes, she had ignored direct orders. Yes, she would probably do it again under the same circumstances. That last answer caused several panel members to exchange glances, but no one challenged it. What could they say? The panel deliberated for 4 hours, and Rowan waited in the hallway outside, surrounded by too many thoughts and not enough certainty. Fellow pilots stopped by to offer support. A general she had never met shook her hand and said nothing, and somewhere in the building, lawyers were arguing about precedent and policy and politics. Finally, the door opened, and she was called back in. The panel chairman, a 3-star general with the weathered face of someone who had made hard decisions before, looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Captain Kess, this panel has completed its review of your actions on the date in question. We have considered testimony from 37 witnesses, reviewed operational procedures and regulations, and examined the tactical situation you faced. We have also considered the recommendations of the SEAL team you supported, the commendations submitted on your behalf, and the strategic implications of our decision." He paused, and Rowan felt her future hanging in that silence. It is the finding of this panel that your actions, while technically in violation of multiple regulations, were justified by the extreme circumstances and resulted in the preservation of American lives. However, we cannot simply ignore those violations without consequence. He continued, and Rowan felt herself dividing into 2 people, one listening carefully to his words and one floating somewhere above, detached and analytical. Therefore, you will receive a formal letter of reprimand for taking off without authorization. This reprimand will remain in your permanent record. Additionally, you are hereby grounded from combat operations for a period of 6 months, pending completion of a command review program designed to reinforce proper authorization procedures. That was better than she had expected, significantly better, but the general wasn't finished. However, in recognition of your exemplary combat performance and the lives saved through your actions, you are also awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross and a promotion to Major, effective immediately. The room tilted. Promoted. After everything, after violating orders and ignoring regulations and doing everything wrong by the book, they were promoting her. It made no sense and perfect sense simultaneously, a bureaucratic solution that punished her and rewarded her and satisfied no one except maybe the Public Relations Office. She managed to keep her voice steady. "Sir, I don't understand. How can I be reprimanded and promoted for the same actions?" The general smiled, and there was something sad in it. "Welcome to the political realities of modern warfare, Major. You're a hero and a problem child, and we're stuck with both. Any questions?" She had 1,000 questions, but only one that mattered. "Sir, after the 6 months, will I be allowed to fly combat missions again?" He nodded. "If you complete the review program satisfactorily, yes, you're too good a pilot to waste on a desk." Relief flooded through her, so intense it was almost painful. They weren't taking her wings. Everything else, the reprimand and the review program and the political circus, all of it was manageable as long as she could still fly. "Thank you, sir." The general stood, extended his hand, and this time his smile was genuine. "Thank you, Major, for reminding us why we do this job." The 6 months that followed were strange, a period of limbo between who she had been and who she was becoming. The review program was as tedious as expected: classroom instruction on authorization procedures and chain of command, and all the things she had violated. She sat through it with patient attention, knowing it was the price of her second chance. But outside those classrooms, something else was happening. The story of her unauthorized rescue had taken on a life of its own, spreading through military circles and beyond, becoming the kind of legend that people told to make a point or inspire courage, or just to remind themselves that sometimes the rules are less important than doing what's right. Other pilots sought her out, asking questions about her thought process, her tactics, her justification. She answered honestly, trying to explain something that defied simple explanation. How do you quantify the value of a human life against the importance of military discipline? How do you measure courage against recklessness? She didn't have good answers, only the certainty that she had made the choice her conscience demanded, and she could live with the consequences. Some found that satisfying. Others found it troubling, a suggestion that personal judgment could override institutional authority. Both were right in their way. She also started receiving letters from unexpected places. Gold Star families, parents who had lost children in combat, thanking her for bringing someone else's child home. Veterans who had needed support and not received it in time, who saw in her actions a vindication of their own experiences. Young women considering military careers, inspired by a female pilot who had proven that competence and courage had no gender. She tried to respond to all of them, though the volume made it impossible. Each letter was a reminder that her actions had rippled far beyond that single firefight in Afghanistan. The SEALs didn't forget her. Vance sent periodic updates, informal notes about training and deployments and the ordinary, extraordinary life of special operations. His team had adopted her as an honorary member, citing her in their own reports as an example of what proper close air support should look like. They invited her to their compound when she was grounded, let her train with them, shoot with them, accepted her into their brotherhood with a completeness that the Air Force had never quite managed. She learned about their world, their tactics, their mindset, and they learned about hers. It was an exchange that enriched both sides and created bonds that would last long after the war was over. During one of those visits, a young SEAL named Petty Officer Jordan Hale approached her nervously. "Major Kess, can I ask you something?" She nodded, and he continued, his words coming in a rush. "My sister wants to be a pilot, Air Force Academy next year. She's worried about being a woman in a man's world, about whether she'll be taken seriously. What would you tell her?" Rowan thought about all the times she had been underestimated, dismissed, or had to prove herself twice as hard for half the credit. She thought about the cost, and the reward, and the simple stubborn refusal to quit that had carried her through. "Tell her this," Rowan said quietly. "Tell her that being underestimated is an advantage if she's smart about it. Let them doubt her, and then prove them wrong so completely they can never doubt again. Tell her that gender doesn't matter in the cockpit, only competence, and competence is something she can build. Tell her that she'll face challenges her male classmates won't, but she'll also develop strengths they never will. And tell her that when the moment comes when she has to choose between the easy path and the right one, she should choose right and deal with the consequences later, because that's what warriors do." Hale nodded slowly, committing it to memory. "She's going to love that. Thank you, ma'am." He hesitated, then added, "She already knows who you are. You're her hero." Rowan felt that familiar tightness in her throat, the weight of being a symbol rather than just a person, but she managed a smile. "Then tell her heroes are just people who showed up when they were needed, and most days, that's enough." The conversation stayed with her, a reminder that her story had become larger than herself, that young women across the military were watching to see if she succeeded or failed.